Hello and welcome to Viewpoints. My name is Kimbley Craig and I'm a city councilwoman in the city of Salinas here in California. With me today is Major Manny Morales of the Miami Police Department. And today we're going to be talking about relationships between politicians and public safety. Manny, welcome.
Welcome. Good morning. Thank you for having me.
We are in a state of confusion, I think, a little bit at the national level. And I think having a conversation at a really sort of real level between public safety and politicians in what's needed to fight homeland security issues within our country. And I wanted to just reach out and get your viewpoints on that.
Well, I think it's interesting that you mentioned that because I think we've always had a complicated relationship, right? Politicians,
absolutely,
law enforcement, kind of trying to achieve the same, but in different ways. So I think a program like this that kind of brings individuals of various disciplines together in the same room, trying to discuss how homeland security affects us all, it's perfect. So it gave me a phenomenal insight on how they live on the other side of the fence.
I will say it was an interesting experience for me. I believe I'm just one of a few politicians that's actually gone through the course. And I remember my first day walking into basically a classroom full of cops or public safety and thought, oh, geez, what did I get myself into? Because I thought it was going to be a much more diverse group of people, which is surprising to me that more politicians don't take those types of courses. As a policymaker, when you're trying to make those decisions, it's really important to know what you're voting on, how you're diverting funds, and the necessities needed for your community or for your state or even for your country.
Well, I thought that was a phenomenal, valuable point from us to see that the policymakers, what are they considering? What aspects of homeland security are they looking at when they're making those decisions? Because, of course, for law enforcement, it's always public safety first. But we kind of forget the intricacies of local government, how you have to account for every aspect of society, right?
Absolutely. I made the argument once in class, I could feasibly shut down every other department within our city, and it still wouldn't be enough for what we need for our public safety department. Our city, the city of Salinas, deals with drug trafficking, with significant gang issues. I would argue human trafficking issues. But the reality is, I have to fund several libraries within our city, parks and recreation. The infrastructure needs of our city alone are $500 million. And so when you're looking at a pie and how you divide it, public safety, I think, represents about 65% of the budget that we have. And constantly a request and a desire and a political movement for more of that budget. So, within our libraries, I have 900 children sitting in after school in our Cesar Chavez library, and that could be determined in an element of prevention for early childhood. You're keeping those kids off the street by keeping them safe in a library after school.
Right, and I think it's interesting that we would, on the law enforcement side, would kind of challenge saying, well, if we don't get the things that we need to aid us in the fight to keep our homeland safe, then if something happens in that library, in that after-school program, how many kids are you willingly going to be able to have there? So we kind of think centric that, we are the key to just about everything. And what I found interesting was how this program opened up our eyes and how that conversation between elected officials and police can only lead to good things when there's that mutual understanding.
I think it's a responsibility of politicians to really delve down and understand, how money is being used. I know initially when I first got elected, there were a lot of toys. There were a lot of toys that we had to fund. I didn't know the difference between a Bearcat or an MRAP or how they were functional. Our armored car for our SWAT team was a 1986 Brinks vehicle that had rusted out and was not bulletproof for our own officers or for people they were rescuing. So really sort of understanding, what command vehicles do, what the interagency operability is between, your local sheriff's office, between CAL FIRE, between our fire department and our police department and how effectively they're working is critical for me as a politician to understand when it comes to funding those things.
I think what's important for law enforcement is how do we effectively share with our policymakers the value of what you prevent? It's not intangible. So when things don't happen, how do we justify the needs of all the toys that we're asking for to keep our community safe? How do we accurately demonstrate the value of what didn't happen? What we prevented? You can't. It's crime. How do you prove to the politicians? Obviously, crime reduction is incredible, but do we really want to wait till we have a tragedy so we can put in place the measures that we know we need to keep our community safe?
I agree wholeheartedly on that. But what I would say is that you have politicians who have other stakes in the ground over different issues. And that's part of the narrative that needs to be sort of created between public safety and politicians. You know, you may have somebody who was elected based on education campaign promises or healthcare campaign promises, or I'm going to fix our parks. And so when you're trying to justify the need for protection of our residents, it's really important to sort of recognize where those politicians are coming from and what can benefit them and their constituency and how they operate in terms of their decision making so that you can get to a majority vote on what you're looking for.
And I think it's difficult for us to kind of understand that. We traditionally have seen a lot of our elected officials as individuals that are only out there seeking to gain that rating, that approval from the community, instead of having the issues at heart in the best interest of the community. So for us to kind of break down that barrier to see, okay, listen, they do have the best interest in mind, and it's just complicated to the point that they have to look at the bigger picture, not just law enforcement as a discipline, but they're looking at other aspects. I think it's incredibly valuable.
That's been probably one of the most challenging things for me. I mean, I take it that I was elected by my voting constituency. I mean, the people in my area voted for me, so I need to listen to them. And when they're telling me that they want, more hours for the library, or they want their roads fixed, and I know that we have issues within the city that are public safety related, they're the ones that put me in office. I'm their representative. And so it's also education to the community about what those needs are. And I think, I had a police chief a few years ago who loved to create drama and fear management within our own community, that we had gang members crawling out of manholes, and it was just not a realistic perspective of our city. However, I think educating our city on the needs and making sure that we are reaching out and letting people know how public safety affects not only, crime right now, but early childhood prevention, intervention, suppression. Those things are critical so that you have the support of the community. And that if you have the support of the community, then you have the support of your politicians.
It's an incredibly challenging time for law enforcement. It seems that every time you turn the TV or look at the printed news, there is some incident that is pitted the police department in against their community. How do you deal with that? How do you prepare that as an elected official? I know that for us, it's always, we're trying to do the right job. We're trying to do what's right. I think there's very few police executives that will deny the fact that there are some cops that are just not fit to be cops. We know that. We do the best that we can and kind of police ourselves via internal investigations and internal securities to try to get those bad apples, to mitigate what those bad apples can do and the damage that they can cause on our communities. But as an elected official, how do you approach that, knowing that it is a challenging time? It's not a popular time to be friendly to law enforcement, right?
Yeah, and we've seen that. I mean, we're actively recruiting at Salinas Police Department, and we are not getting the applications that we have in the past. And we pay well. Our, California public employee retirement system is fantastic, but the narrative there is what's trending nationally is, all of the YouTube videos and all of the cell phone videos that have been uploaded to sort of demonstrate when cops don't always do the right thing. that is an issue. And we have, in the city of Salinas, I think it was in 2014, we had 4 officer-involved shootings where the victim or the suspect died. And so we had a real discussion about reaching out to faith-based communities. You want to reach out to pastors. You want to reach out to those community advocacy groups and be available and say, hey, it's 1 step forward, 2 steps back. We really need to have a conversation about what you need in order to gain our trust again. Because the reality of it is you have a lot of people who automatically support law enforcement. You have people who are military-based. You have people who are your supporters no matter what. But then, like for the city of Salinas, we have a large immigrant population. It's an agricultural community. There's a feeling of fear based on their own, based on their own experiences in Mexico. And coming here, they have a fear of police. And situations like that don't help in the dialogue between residents and police officers. So it's really working collaboratively. I mean, you say, how do you deal with that as a politician? I can't tell you how many community meetings I've had. And outreach, our police chief had a "we're here to hear" conversation, basically where he was available to anyone who wanted to reach him for a certain amount of hours each week. And it's creating the narrative. We also reached out to the Department of Justice and asked for some assistance and feedback on what we could do better as a police department. And nobody likes to have their own police department policed, but the reality is when you're facing community frustration and outrage for what you've done. We had riots off of our officer-involved shootings. You have to take those steps. I mean, you absolutely have to take those steps. You won't break down those barriers if you don't make yourself available and make people feel like they've been heard.
And you mentioned fear, and I think that's key. And I think having the community fear the police department is what keeps me up at night.
Yeah.
Knowing that there's somebody out there who might have a vital piece of information, not only for a crime, but nowadays for Homeland Security, that might have that missing piece of the puzzle that is afraid to come forward because of the bad publicity and the challenging times that law enforcement faces. So I think it's kind of critical, like you said, to go out there and show the community, listen, we are part of you. We don't import cops from another country. We take individuals from our community. We're just a small piece of the community, and there's good and bad. We just got to hold ourselves accountable and police ourselves better to make sure that we have the impact that we need in our communities. And
I would agree with you 100%. Again, we have, when we were taking the course and we were talking about radicalization and how people need to, if you see something, say something. That's our number one issue in our city is a lot of unsolved crime because, snitches get stitches too. And that's one of the big narratives that we have to get past in the community. You don't talk to cops. And part of that comes from fear of, immigration. Some of that comes from fear of past experience with tangling with law enforcement and understanding and educating people that we don't really have an interest in, and this is a completely different topic in itself, but we don't really have an interest in immigration status, but rather we're here to protect all residents of the community. And understanding that immigrants, particularly in our city, absolutely make up the civic fabric of our community.
Yeah, I wholeheartedly agree.
Well, Manny, I think we could probably talk about this much longer, but in the interest of time, I just want to say thank you for coming out from Miami, and it was great to see you again, my fellow classmate and alumni, and hopefully we can continue the discussion.
Thank you for having me here. I had a great time.
Thanks.